My name is Emmett Ratcatcher Royce, pest control specialist at Boston General Hospital. I survived 72 hours of living hell when Patient Zero unleashed the zombie outbreak that destroyed our city. The rats warned me days before. I saw the first, bite, watched the hospital fall, and uncovered terrible secrets while fighting to escape. This is how I survived when everyone else died. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. You can call me Emmett, but most people know me as Ratcatcher Royce. Been in urban pest control for 15 years, specializing in complex infrastructure systems, hospitals, subway tunnels, water treatment facilities, places where the stakes of an infestation go beyond simple discomfort. When Massachusetts General Hospital contracted me 3 years ago to handle their persistent rodent issues, I never imagined it would ultimately save my life. I approach pest control differently than most. Animals, especially rats, are indicators, canaries, in the coal mine. They respond to environmental changes before humans notice them. That's why I didn't just set traps at Mass General. I monitored behavioral patterns, mapped migration routes, tracked breeding cycles. The hospital administration thought it was overkill. Just kill the rats, they'd say. But understanding why rats move through a space tells you something crucial about that space itself. That's how I first knew something was wrong at the hospital, weeks before the outbreak became public. The rats were showing classic displacement behavior, the kind you only see when something has fundamentally disrupted their environment. They weren't just moving, they were fleeing. And they were fleeing from specific areas, particularly the research wing on the northwest side of the complex. I documented the pattern and reported it to hospital administration 3 times. Each report was filed and forgotten. The final time, Dr. Winters, the administrative director, actually laughed. "You're telling me the rats are running from something, and that concerns you more than the rats themselves?" I couldn't make him understand that rats don't abandon food-rich environments without cause. Something was driving them out. By this point, there had been scattered news reports about isolated cases of a new virus, just a ticker at the bottom of the screen. CDC monitoring unusual fever cases in Northeast. They were calling it rage fever because patients became aggressive and disoriented before eventually slipping into comas. Boston had reported only 3 official cases, all supposedly contained at Mass General's isolation ward. But there was something off about the hospital's atmosphere. I noticed CDC personnel on site, which administration claimed was routine, but their presence felt secretive. They occupied a section of the research wing that suddenly became restricted even to most hospital staff. New security doors were installed. New waste disposal protocols implemented practically overnight. I remember overhearing 2 researchers arguing in the cafeteria. One said, "Containment has already failed." The other replied, "No one's authorized disclosure yet." They went silent when they noticed me bussing my tray nearby. That was 8 days before the outbreak. The Monday before everything changed, I found something disturbing in the sub-basement near the boiler room. 3 dead rats with unusual symptoms. Their eyes showed petechial hemorrhaging, tiny burst blood vessels that made them look like they'd been crying blood. More concerning, a maintenance worker told me he'd seen these rats behaving aggressively before death, fighting each other savagely, which is uncommon among rats from the same colony. I took one specimen to a veterinarian friend off the record. She noted abnormalities in the brain tissue visible even without sophisticated equipment. "Whatever killed this rat caused significant neurological inflammation," she told me. "I'd wear gloves handling these if I were you, Emmett." That same day, I discovered something that should have been the final warning. The disposal protocols for the research wing had been compromised. Biological waste was mixing with the regular drainage system. In my 15 years dealing with urban pests, I'd never filed a more urgent report. It was ignored. The night before the outbreak, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about those rats, about the CDC presence, about the dismissive administrators. Something was connecting these dots, but I couldn't quite see the full picture. I decided to do a comprehensive inspection of the sub-basement the next morning, Tuesday, October 11th, 2022. focusing on areas near the research wing's waste disposal system. That Tuesday morning started unusually quiet. There's a particular silence that comes before catastrophe, not peace, absence, like the world is holding its breath. That Tuesday morning was the quietest I'd ever heard the hospital. The usual bustle of shift changes, the squeak of gurneys, the constant intercom chatter, all oddly subdued. I arrived at 7 in the morning, signed in at security, and headed directly to the sub-basement. For 3 hours, I methodically checked every trap, every potential entry point, every drainage junction. The rat activity had changed again. Now there were no rats at all in the areas where just days before they'd been frantically fleeing. Complete absence. In 15 years of pest control, I'd never seen rats completely abandon a food-rich environment, like a hospital. Something had driven them beyond fear into complete evacuation. I was documenting this in the maintenance tunnels beneath the East Wing when I heard it. The first screams echoed through the ventilation system. Working in hospitals, you learn to distinguish types of screams: pain, grief, shock. These were different. These were primal fear. My first instinct was to stay put. The maintenance tunnel was secure, isolated. Whatever was happening above could play out without me. But curiosity, or maybe responsibility, pushed me toward the access ladder. I climbed up to the ground floor, emerging through a utility door, near the emergency room. What I saw will never leave me. The emergency room was in chaos. Medical staff were running, some trying to restrain patients, others fleeing toward exits. Security guards were shouting contradictory instructions, and, in the center of it all was Patient Zero, though I didn't know that term yet. He was a middle-aged man, office worker type, with bandages on his forearm. His movements were wrong, jerky, uncoordinated. He had a nurse pinned against the intake desk. He wasn't punching or slapping, he was biting her face. 2 security guards were trying to pull him off. A doctor was frantically preparing a sedative injection. More screams came from an adjacent triage room. Through the window in the door, I could see another patient convulsing on the floor while medical staff backed away. I stood frozen, trying to process the impossible scene. A security guard finally pulled Patient Zero off the nurse, only to have the man twist with unnatural strength and bite into the guard's neck. Blood spurted across the white floor tiles in an arc. The doctor with the sedative backed away, then turned and ran. Dr. Patel was trying to help restrain Patient Zero when she got bit. 30 minutes later, she was sweating, disoriented. We watched her collapse by the nurse's station. When she got up, her eyes had that same cloudy look. She wasn't Dr. Patel anymore. I retreated to the utility door, watching as the situation deteriorated rapidly. More infected patients appeared from other wings. The pattern became clear even in those first chaotic minutes. Bite, fever, collapse, reanimation. Each victim became a new vector, creating more victims, exponential spread. The hospital director activated lockdown protocols, the worst possible decision. They sealed every exit, trapping us inside with the infected. Within an hour, the PA system went from "remain calm" to desperate pleas for security to report to various wings. My pest control access card became my lifeline. While others were trapped in corridors and public areas, I could move through maintenance tunnels and service elevators. I initially planned to reach an emergency exit on the east side, but crossing the main corridor proved impossible. The infected had concentrated there, drawn by the movement and noise of panicked staff and patients. I realized my access card opened parts of the hospital most people didn't know existed. When I saw the maintenance tunnels were clear, I made my first smart decision, disappearing into the walls of the hospital. For the next 6 hours, I carefully observed the infected from hiding spots throughout the hospital. I needed to understand what we were dealing with. They weren't dead, they were breathing, bleeding when injured. But their behavior was programmed. They reacted to sound with perfect consistency. They couldn't reason, but they never tired. They didn't seem to need rest or sustenance, though they continuously attacked and bit the uninfected. The infection spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. I watched nurses and doctors transform after being bitten. 30 minutes was the average time from bite to full transformation. The fever stage lasted about 10 minutes. Victims, sweating profusely, becoming disoriented, often violent even before turning. Then collapse, a period of complete unconsciousness lasting between 5 to 7 minutes. Then they would rise, transformed. Their eyes clouded over with that distinctive milky film. Their movements became jerky, yet purposeful. They lost all ability to speak or reason, driven only to bite and infect. I started taking notes on their behavior. They couldn't see well in darkness but could navigate by sound with terrifying accuracy. They didn't coordinate attacks, but their persistence was overwhelming. Barricades that would stop rational humans failed against their relentless pressure. They didn't feel pain. They didn't stop unless their brains or upper spinal cords were destroyed. By nightfall, the 4th floor was completely overrun. I watched through vent grates as staff barricaded doors with hospital beds. It never worked. The infected didn't coordinate attacks, but their persistence was relentless. Metal fatigue always wins against human endurance. From the 8th floor maintenance closet, I could see Cambridge across the river. Fires had broken out. Police barriers on the bridges were being overwhelmed. The infection was spreading geometrically, each victim creating 2 more, then 4, then 8. I needed a safer place to wait out the chaos, hoping for external rescue. I found an overlooked mechanical room between the 3rd and 4th floors, a maintenance space for the HVAC system that didn't appear on public hospital blueprints. I used my knowledge of the building to secure it, blocking the single access vent with a metal cabinet, creating a makeshift alarm system using items from my pest control kit. In that small, secure space, I developed my first survival systems. I started marking safe routes with pest control symbols other survivors wouldn't recognize but I could follow. Yellow for cleared paths, red for infected presence, blue for resources. My years tracking rodent movements through buildings had become unexpectedly relevant. The first night in the hospital was the longest of my life. The screams gradually diminished, not because the situation improved, but because fewer people remained to scream. The lights failed section by section as backup generators ran out of fuel or failed. By midnight, most of the hospital was dark. Through air vents, I could hear the irregular shuffling of the infected searching for prey. Occasionally, new screams would erupt when they found someone. I stayed silent, motionless in my hiding spot, conserving the batteries in my flashlight, rationing the granola bars and water bottle from my work bag. The last organized staff were barricaded in oncology. They had patients they refused to abandon. I watched from the ceiling crawl space as they rationed morphine, not for pain, but for when the barricades inevitably failed. Some choices are beyond horrible. As the first 24 hours came to a close, I realized rescue might not be coming. Through windows, I could see military helicopters circling but not landing. Emergency broadcasts on a nurse's abandoned radio spoke of quarantine zones and containment protocols. Boston was being sealed off, not saved. After the first 24 hours, thirst became my enemy. The small water bottle from my work bag was empty, and I needed to risk more dangerous paths to reach areas with resources. I developed a methodical approach to movement through the hospital, timing my journeys between what I began to recognize as the infected's patrol patterns. They wandered predictably like predators established in a territory. I decided to make my first major foray to the cafeteria's storeroom. It was on the 2nd floor, 2 levels up from my hiding place, through sections I hadn't yet mapped. I spent nearly an hour just watching through vent openings, documenting infected movements, planning my route. The journey required crossing an exposed nurses' station. I timed the movements of 3 infected who circled through the area, a former security guard still in uniform, a patient in a hospital gown, and someone in scrubs. Their rotations weren't coordinated but followed individual patterns. I identified a 40-second window when all 3 would be out of sight. Moving through the hospital required absolute silence. I'd removed my boots, wrapping my feet in gauze. I'd found in a supply closet. Each step was calculated, heel to toe, distributing weight to avoid creaking floorboards. The techniques I'd developed to avoid startling rats while inspecting infestations became survival skills. I made it to the cafeteria undetected and found the storeroom locked. For a moment I considered breaking the door, but any noise would draw the infected. Instead, I remembered the cafeteria manager kept a spare key hidden above the door frame, a violation of hospital policy I'd discovered months earlier while tracking rat entry points. The key was still there. Inside, I found bottled water, non-perishable food, and even better, a staff backpack containing a cell phone. The phone had no signal but still had battery life. I could use its light, its clock, and, most valuable, its camera to look around corners without exposing myself. As I carefully packed supplies, I heard voices, actual human voices, not the animalistic grunts of the infected. Someone else had survived. I froze, listening. Two people arguing in hushed tones from the kitchen area. "We can't wait any longer. The military's pulling out," a man's voice said. "The roof extractions at midnight, we have to bring the samples," a woman replied. "Forget the samples, they're not worth dying for." Without them, this whole thing was for nothing. The containment failure. Their voices trailed off as they moved. Deeper into the kitchen. I should have stayed hidden, but curiosity pushed me to follow. Peering through the service window, I saw them. A man and woman in lab coats, both wearing CDC identification badges. They were collecting metal containers from a commercial refrigerator, loading them into specialized transport cases. The woman's hands were shaking as she checked labels. The man kept glancing at the cafeteria entrance, a handgun visible in his waistband. I must have made some small noise because the man suddenly turned, drawing his weapon. "Who's there?" I stepped back but knocked into a shelf of cans. The clatter was deafening in the silent hospital. The infected would hear it. I had seconds to decide, reveal myself to the CDC personnel or flee. I ran. Behind me, I heard the cafeteria. Doors burst open, followed by screams and gunshots. The CDC researchers had their own problems now. I didn't look back, retracing my path to my hiding place, the backpack of supplies clutched against my chest. From my safe room, I heard more gunshots, then silence. Whatever happened in the cafeteria was over. I wondered about those samples, about what containment failure meant. The pieces were starting to connect, but the full picture remained elusive. The cell phone I'd found became invaluable. I checked it regularly, hoping for some return of service, but the networks were overwhelmed or shut down. The photo gallery contained nothing useful, just personal pictures of a cafeteria worker's family. But I used the camera constantly, extending it around corners before exposing myself. By the second day, I had established a routine. Sleep in short bursts, never more than 30 minutes at a time. Move only when necessary. Document everything, infected. Concentrations, resource locations, structural weaknesses. My pest control notebook became a survival manual. The hospital was transforming around me. Without maintenance, systems began failing. Water pressure dropped. The air grew stale as ventilation systems shut down. The corpses of the truly dead, those who had been killed rather than infected, began to decompose, creating a sickening odor that permeated everything. Through windows, I watched Boston collapse. National Guard units initially established checkpoints on major streets, but were progressively forced to retreat. Civilian evacuation turned to panic, turned to abandonment. By nightfall of the second day, parts of the city were burning. I decided to risk the research wing, seeking answers. The journey would be dangerous. The west side of the hospital had the highest concentration of infected, but I needed to understand what had happened. If this was spreading beyond Boston, information might be as valuable as supplies. Navigating to the research wing required crossing the main lobby, a massive open space with limited cover. I waited until 3 in the morning, when the infected seemed least active. Even then, I counted at least 12 wandering the space, their movements erratic but constant. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Different behavioral patterns among the infected. Some wandered continuously, while others stood motionless for long periods, almost like sentries. Some seemed attracted to light, others to movement. They were varied in their behaviors, yet all driven by the same basic imperative: bite, spread, infect. Using a rolling medical cart as mobile cover, I crossed the lobby in agonizing slow motion, freezing whenever an infected turned in my direction. It took 45 minutes to cross a space that normally took 30 seconds. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the increasingly cool temperature of the unheated hospital. The research wing's entrance had been barricaded, then breached. The doors hung from broken hinges, and spent shell casings littered the floor, evidence of a last stand that had ultimately failed. Inside, the scene was one of deliberate destruction. Computer monitors smashed, papers burned in metal trash cans, laboratory equipment destroyed. Whatever research had been conducted here, someone had tried to eliminate all evidence of it. But they'd been thorough in their research and careless in their destruction. In an overturned filing cabinet, I found pages of a report that had scattered during the chaos. The documents were technical, filled with virological terminology beyond my understanding. But certain phrases stood out. Zoonotic transmission pathway, accelerated mutation rate, neurological restructuring, and most disturbing, containment protocols compromised at Facility 7, potential spread to civilian population. I photographed everything with the cell phone, then continued searching. In a director's office relatively untouched by the destruction, I found a laptop still connected to an emergency power outlet. It was locked, but a yellow sticky note on the monitor had what looked like a password. Redactyl 22. The laptop contained emails, most deleted but recoverable from the trash folder. They painted a disturbing picture, a research project studying a novel neurological virus with unusual properties. The virus had been discovered in bats in Southeast Asia, then brought to Boston for study due to its unique ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. According to the emails, there had been a containment breach 3 weeks earlier. 2 lab technicians had been exposed but showed no immediate symptoms. They had been monitored while continuing to work. One email, dated just 4 days before the outbreak, raised alarms about unusual aggression in one technician, recommending isolation protocols. The response: isolation denied pending further symptom development. Project timeline cannot accommodate delays. My blood ran cold reading these exchanges. They had known. They had identified patient 0 before he became patient 0, and they had allowed him to continue working rather than disrupt their research timeline. As I was processing this information, I heard movement in the hallway outside the office. I quickly shut the laptop and slid under the desk. Through the glass door panel, I saw a figure pass by. Not the jerky movements of the infected, but the deliberate stealth of another survivor. I held my breath as the door slowly opened. Combat boots came into view, then military fatigues. A soldier, sweeping the room with a rifle equipped with a tactical light. "Clear," he said quietly into a radio. "Proceeding to objective." I remained hidden, unsure if revealing myself would bring safety or new danger. The soldier methodically searched cabinets and drawers, clearly looking for something specific. He ignored the laptop that had given me such valuable information. He left without discovering me, continuing down the hallway. I waited several minutes, then carefully followed. He moved with military precision through the research wing, checking rooms, occasionally consulting a small device that looked like a specialized GPS. He finally stopped at a laboratory marked Containment Level 3. The door had been secured with a heavy padlock that he now cut with bolt cutters. Inside, he went directly to a refrigeration unit, removed several vials, and carefully packed them in a specialized container. I accidentally shifted my weight, causing a floor tile to creak. The soldier spun, raising his weapon. "Who's there?" "Show yourself." For a moment, I considered running again, but after what I'd learned, I needed answers more than safety. I stepped into view, hands raised. "I'm not infected," I said. "I work here. Pest control." The soldier kept his weapon trained on me. "How long have you been following me?" "Just a few minutes. I was hiding in the director's office. Listen, I found information about what happened here. There was a containment breach weeks ago. They knew and did nothing." His expression didn't change. "That information is classified." "Classified? Look around you. The world is ending. I think classification is a bit irrelevant now, don't you? He lowered his weapon slightly. What's your name? Emmett Royce. People call me Ratcatcher. Specialist Dawson, 10th Mountain Division. I'm on a recovery mission to secure research samples. Those vials you're collecting, that's the virus, isn't it? He hesitated, then nodded. A variation of it, supposedly the original strain before mutation. Who sent you? Is there a cure being developed? His radio crackled before he could answer. Dawson, extraction in 10 minutes. Roof access. Get moving. Roger that, he replied, then turned back to me. Listen, Ratcatcher, there's a helicopter coming to the roof. If you want out of this nightmare, that's your chance. I should have been elated at the escape opportunity, but something felt wrong. Why are they prioritizing samples over survivors? There must be others alive in the hospital. Dawson's expression hardened. Orders are to extract research materials only. No civilians. But you're offering to take me? I'm not leaving anyone behind who can still walk and talk, against orders or not. He checked his watch. Decision time. Roof access is 4 floors up. We need to move now if you're coming. I had seconds to decide. Escape with a soldier who was defying orders, or remain in the increasingly dangerous hospital. I'm coming, I said. We moved through the hospital efficiently, Dawson taking point, clearing corners with practiced precision. The infected were drawn to his movements, but he dispatched them with silent efficiency. Combat knife to the brainstem, no wasted motion. Near the stairwell to the roof, we encountered a group of 5 infected blocking our path. Too many for silent elimination. Dawson reached for his sidearm, but I stopped him. Wait, I whispered. Noise will draw more. I have another way. I led him to a service elevator shaft I'd discovered during my explorations. The elevator wasn't functioning, but maintenance ladders ran the height of the shaft. It was a tight fit with his equipment, but we managed to climb to the roof level undetected. The helicopter was already there, rotors turning, a crew member anxiously scanning the rooftop. When he spotted Dawson, he gestured urgently. As we crossed the open rooftop, Dawson suddenly stopped. Wait, something's wrong. The crew member had drawn a weapon, not pointing it at the hospital entrance where infected might emerge, but at us. They told me no witnesses. Dawson said quietly, the samples are leaving. We're not supposed to. Before I could process this betrayal, the rooftop door burst open. A swarm of infected poured through, at least a dozen drawn by the helicopter noise. The crew member fired at them instead of us, creating momentary chaos. Run! Dawson shouted, pushing me toward the helicopter. We sprinted across the roof as the infected scattered in different directions, confused by multiple targets and the deafening rotor noise. We reached the helicopter just as the crew member was overwhelmed by infected. Dawson shoved me aboard, then turned to fight off 2 infected that had followed us. The pilot, seeing his teammate fall, began lifting off. Without waiting for Dawson, I grabbed Dawson's pack strap, trying to pull him aboard as the helicopter rose. For a moment I thought I had him. Then an infected latched onto his leg. I saw the bite happen in horrifying clarity. Dawson looked up at me, nodded once, then deliberately let go of the strut. The helicopter banked hard, flying east toward the harbor. Below us, Boston was a patchwork of darkness and fire. Military cordons were visible around the city perimeter, not keeping the infected in, I realized, but keeping potential witnesses from escaping. The pilot spoke into his headset, not to me. Package secured. Witness situation handled. Containment breach expanding beyond projections. Recommend Protocol Omega. I didn't know what Protocol Omega was, but his tone made my skin crawl. I glanced at the sample case Dawson had entrusted to me before falling. Whatever was inside had been deemed more valuable than human lives. The helicopter flew low over the harbor, then settled onto a landing pad on a naval vessel anchored offshore. As we touched down, I was surrounded by personnel in military hazmat suits. They seized the samples and escorted me, none too gently, below decks. I was placed in a secured medical bay, where a team in full containment gear examined me for bites or scratches. Finding none, they still quarantined me, locking the door from outside. Through a small porthole, I watched military aircraft taking off from Logan Airport, flying in formation over the city. Then came the sound, distant at first, then growing to a roar as fighter jets passed overhead. I couldn't see what happened next, but the flashes of light reflected on the clouds told me everything. They were firebombing Boston. I spent 6 hours in that quarantine room, watching Boston burn from the porthole. The naval vessel, which I later learned was the USS Arlington, an amphibious transport dock, remained positioned offshore, monitoring the destruction. Military personnel moved with practiced efficiency outside my room, none acknowledging my existence beyond basic containment protocols. My situation changed when a medical officer finally entered, dressed in less extensive protective gear than the earlier teams, just a mask and gloves. She introduced herself as Commander Reyes. "Mr. Royce, your story about being hospital pest control checks out. Your employer confirmed your assignment at Massachusetts General." She consulted a tablet. "What doesn't check out is how you survived. 48 hours in an overrun hospital with minimal supplies and no weapons training." I explained my knowledge of the hospital's infrastructure, my observation skills, my approach to movement and resource gathering. She seemed skeptical but impressed. "We're headed to a secure facility in Rhode Island," she said finally. "You'll remain in quarantine for 72 hours for observation. Standard protocol for all evacuees from the hot zone." "Evacuees?" I asked. "I didn't see you evacuating anyone else. I saw you bombing the city." Her expression hardened. "Those were localized tactical strikes at high-concentration infection zones. And there were other evacuations, limited medical personnel, government officials, and civilians who reached extraction points." She was lying. I'd seen the scale of the bombing, the lack of evacuation efforts. But arguing would get me nowhere. I needed to play along until I understood what was happening. "What about my information?" I asked. "The research documents I found, the emails about the containment breach weeks ago, doesn't that matter?" "All information is being compiled for the investigation," she said mechanically. "Rest assured, those responsible will be held accountable." After she left, I realized my backpack had been removed while I was examined. With it went the cell phone containing photos of the documents, my pest control notebook with my observations, and the small sample container Dawson had given me. They'd taken everything that could prove what I'd witnessed. During the journey to Rhode Island, I was kept isolated but treated reasonably well. 3 meals a day, medical checkups, even clean clothes. No one discussed Boston or answered questions about the outbreak's spread. The few personnel I interacted with followed the same script. That information is restricted during ongoing operations. We docked at Naval Station Newport 30 hours after leaving Boston. I was transferred to a repurposed university research building, now serving as a quarantine and processing facility for survivors. For the first time, I saw other civilians, perhaps 50 people in a facility designed to hold hundreds. The quarantine protocol was thorough. Blood draws every 6 hours, constant temperature monitoring, psychological evaluations. We were housed in individual rooms but allowed to interact in common areas during specified periods. This is where I began gathering information from other survivors. Monica, a surgical nurse from Tufts Medical Center, described a similar pattern of illness and confusion. They knew something was coming, she told me quietly during a shared meal period. We received updated isolation protocols 2 weeks before the outbreak. New equipment was installed in certain wards. Additional security was hired. A subway worker, named Terrence, described the transit system's gradual shutdown. MBTA management called an emergency meeting 3 days before it hit the news. They distributed new biohazard kits to all station managers, told us to report anyone with fever or disorientation immediately. When I asked why, they said it was seasonal precautions. In October, pattern after pattern emerged from these accounts. Preparations made without explanations, warnings without context, protocols put in place and later disregarded. The picture was becoming clearer. Authorities had indications of what was coming, but didn't manage to contain it, and then focused on managing the story rather than the crisis. On my third day in quarantine, Commander Reyes returned with 2 military police officers. "Mr. Royce, you've been cleared of infection. You're being transferred to civilian emergency housing in Providence. What about the others here?" I asked. "They'll be processed according to their clearance status," she replied vaguely. The MPs escorted me to a transport truck. As we passed through several security checkpoints, I noticed something unsettling. The facility was tightening security. More personnel were arriving than leaving. This didn't feel like recovery. It felt like expanding control. In the truck, 2 other survivors joined me, Monica and an elderly man I hadn't seen before. The man introduced himself as Dr. Cohen, formerly of the CDC's Emerging Infectious Diseases Division. "They're keeping things from us," he whispered once. The truck was moving. "This isn't just about Boston, it's spreading faster than the models projected." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because I helped build those models 3 years ago," he replied. The virus was labeled HZV1, Hendra Zaire variant, a hybrid pathogen combining traits from Hendra virus and Ebola Zaire, with unique neurological effects. It was never supposed to leave the lab. "But it did," Monica said. "Weeks before the public knew." Dr. Cohen nodded gravely. "The initial containment issue affected 2 technicians. Standard protocol required full isolation, but the response team considered their symptoms mild and chose to monitor them while they stayed at work. That decision gave the virus time to change, spreading more easily before signs even appeared." His account matched the emails I'd uncovered in the research wing. "So patient 0, the man who attacked the ER nurse, he was one of them?" "Thomas Rivera," Dr. Cohen confirmed. "Lab technician, age 36. He reported headaches and a mild fever for 3 days before things escalated. By then, he'd already come into contact with dozens of people, family, friends, commuters." "Why are you telling us this?" Monica asked. "Because we're not headed for civilian housing," he said quietly. "This route leads to a level 4 containment site. I recognize it. They're gathering individuals who have expertise or were exposed to sensitive information." A heavy sense of unease settled in. "We're being removed from the public." "Not removed," Dr. Cohen corrected. "Managed. They want people who can help quietly, but they won't allow open discussion. There will be no accountability unless people know the truth." The truck stopped at a checkpoint. Through the canvas flap, I could see we were nowhere near Providence. This was a rural area with high security fencing. Military personnel with distinctive insignia. I didn't recognize "Check the truck's manifest." "This is our chance," Dr. Cohen whispered. "When they open the back, create a distraction. Monica and I will handle the rest." Before I could ask what he meant, the truck's rear door opened. 2 guards climbed in to secure us for transfer. Dr. Cohen suddenly clutched his chest, gasping dramatically. The guards moved toward him as Monica began shouting for medical assistance. In the confusion, I noticed Dr. Cohen slip something to Monica. A small key card palmed from one of the guards as they checked his pulse. The commotion brought additional personnel, including a medic who began assessment protocols. Dr. Cohen was removed from the truck on a stretcher, creating momentary chaos in the transfer procedure. Monica positioned herself near the door, the key card hidden in her sleeve. When one guard turned to retrieve documentation, she made her move, sliding the card through a reader to disable the facility entrance alarm. The momentary deactivation of the security system was our only opportunity. "Run!" Monica hissed, shoving me toward the perimeter fence where the alarm deactivation had created a blind spot. I hesitated for only a second before following her lead. We sprinted across the compound using parked vehicles as cover. Reaching the fence, we discovered Dr. Cohen's final gift. He'd created a medical emergency precisely where the fence had a maintenance access point that could be opened with the stolen keycard. We slipped through, entering dense woodland beyond. The facility perimeter. Alarms began blaring behind us as the system reset and detected the breach. Monica moved with surprising confidence through the forest. "Which way?" I asked as we pushed deeper into the trees. "Northeast," she replied without hesitation. 3 miles to a maintenance road that connects to Route 116. My brother has a cabin near Situate Reservoir. If he evacuated there as planned, we'll have temporary shelter. I followed her lead, impressed by her preparation. As we moved, she explained that she'd been planning an escape since arriving at the quarantine facility. The medical staff were collecting blood and tissue samples well beyond infectious disease protocols, she said. They're studying us, not helping us. We traveled through the night, avoiding roads, using streams to mask our scent in case they deployed tracking dogs. By dawn, we reached the maintenance road, then followed it cautiously toward the main highway. The world outside quarantine was in the early stages of collapse. The roads were littered with abandoned vehicles. Military checkpoints had been established, at major intersections checking travelers for symptoms or bites. We avoided these by moving through forest parallel to the roads. We reached Monica's brother's cabin by nightfall. It was empty but stocked with supplies: canned food, bottled water, ammunition, medical supplies. A note on the kitchen table indicated he'd continued north toward family in Vermont 3 days earlier. He didn't wait, Monica said, her composure finally breaking. She showed me a family photo, her brother with his wife and 2 children. He promised he'd wait 1 week. The cabin had a solar-powered radio. We tuned to emergency broadcasts, learning that the infection had spread far beyond Boston. New York was under martial law. Philadelphia had been partially evacuated. The official story claimed the virus was a weaponized pathogen released by terrorists, with no mention of the lab origin or government responsibility. They're rewriting history already, Monica said bitterly. We stayed at the cabin for 3 days, gathering strength and information. Monica's medical training proved invaluable. She recognized that our blood was potentially valuable for research, having been exposed but not infected. Each morning and evening she drew small samples from us both, carefully documenting observations. If this gets worse, understanding natural immunity could be crucial, she explained. The quarantine facility was rushing their analysis, missing crucial data points. On the 4th morning, we spotted a military drone circling the area. Methodical, grid patterns that suggested a search operation. We packed essential supplies and abandoned the cabin, heading northwest toward less populated regions. The journey through Rhode Island's rural areas revealed the fragmentation of society. Some communities had barricaded themselves, turning away all outsiders. Others had descended into lawlessness. We avoided both, moving primarily at night, resting in concealed locations during daylight. We encountered our first infected outside, the quarantine zone near the Connecticut border, a family of 4 wandering along a rural highway. Their movements had the same distinctive pattern I'd observed in the hospital, jerky but purposeful, responding primarily to sound. We hid in roadside brush, watching as they investigated an abandoned car before moving. The incubation period is shortening, Monica observed. These people transformed more quickly than the early cases. The virus is adapting. More disturbing was what we found in a small town called Foster, evidence of variant behavior among the infected. While most wandered randomly until stimulated by sound or movement, some appeared to remain in specific locations, almost like sentries. Others moved in repeated patterns, as if patrolling. They're developing specialized behaviors, I noted, recalling similar observations from the hospital. Different roles within the infected population. That shouldn't be possible, Monica replied, her scientific training clearly troubled by the observation. This isn't colony behavior like insects. The virus shouldn't be capable of creating specialized functions. Unless that's exactly what it was designed to do, I countered, remembering the research documents I'd glimpsed. What if HZV1 was engineered specifically to affect neurological functions in coordinated ways? The implication was terrifying, not just a virus that turned humans into mindless attackers, but one that potentially created a new form of coordinated organism. The infected weren't just spreading, they were adapting, evolving, perhaps even developing rudimentary collective behaviors. We continued northwest, eventually crossing into Massachusetts again, well west of the Boston quarantine zone. Here, we encountered the first organized resistance to both the infected and the government containment efforts. A network of survivors sharing information via shortwave radio, coordinating resources, and documenting the truth about the outbreak's origins. Their leader, a former Army virologist named Dr. Hassan, examined the blood samples Monica had collected from us. "You both show unusual antibody responses," he confirmed, "similar to what we've seen in approximately 5% of exposed individuals. Natural resistance, not immunity." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you can be infected, but your bodies fight it differently. The neurological takeover is slower, potentially stoppable with the right intervention. We're working on a treatment protocol, but progress is slow without proper lab equipment." Dr. Hassan's group had established a hidden research outpost in an abandoned industrial complex. They had gathered substantial evidence about the virus's origins and the government's failed containment efforts. Their goal wasn't just survival, but accountability, documenting everything for an eventual reckoning, assuming civilization survived. "The public deserves to know what happened," Dr. Hassan told us. "This wasn't just an accident. It was negligence compounded by cover-up. The early containment failure could have been managed if they'd followed protocols instead of prioritizing their research timeline." I shared everything I'd learned at Mass General, while Monica contributed her medical observations. Together, with information from other survivors, a comprehensive picture emerged. A virus engineered for neurological research had escaped containment, been allowed to spread through institutional failure, then deliberately covered up when it couldn't be controlled. On our 6th day with the resistance group, perimeter alarms triggered. Military drones had located the complex. We had minutes to evacuate. The group split into predetermined teams, heading for backup locations established throughout New England. Monica and I joined Dr. Hassan's team, evacuating with research materials and communication equipment. As we fled, we glimpsed military vehicles approaching the complex from multiple directions, not standard army units, but specialized forces with unfamiliar insignia, the same I'd seen at the Rhode Island facility. Department of Agricultural Security, Dr. Hassan identified them. A cover organization for biological containment operations. They're erasing evidence and witnesses. We escaped into the dense woods of western Massachusetts, eventually reaching a secondary safe location. An old fire watchtower converted for the resistance's use. From this elevated position, we could see evidence of the infection's spread reaching even rural communities. Small towns that had initially barricaded themselves were now showing the movement patterns of the infected. Dr. Hassan's satellite communications equipment brought more disturbing news. The official quarantine zones were expanding across the Northeast. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, all designated as compromised zones, with no civilian access permitted. Military operations, described as containment measures, were actually scorched earth protocols, eliminating infected and uninfected alike. They've given up on saving these areas, Dr. Hassan explained grimly. Now they're just preventing spread and eliminating witnesses. That night, we received a transmission from another resistance cell with information from a military whistleblower. The virus had been transported to Boston specifically because the facility had unique neurological research capabilities. The project's goal wasn't defensive, as claimed in official documentation, but exploratory, investigating how neurological pathogens could be modified to affect human behavior in predictable ways. Mind control research disguised as defensive medical preparation, Dr. Hassan translated. They were weaponizing a pathogen while calling it vaccine development. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just negligence or bureaucratic failure. It was deliberate experimentation gone catastrophically wrong, then covered up to protect those responsible. As dawn broke on the 7th day since my escape from the hospital, we faced a critical decision. Continue west toward rumored safe zones in the Midwest, or turn south to reach the whistleblower who had more evidence about the virus's origins. Dr. Hassan's team voted to split again, half continuing west with civilian survivors, half heading south to collect the whistleblower's evidence. Monica chose to go west, believing her medical skills would be needed among refugee populations. I chose south, The pest control specialist in me couldn't walk away from identifying the source of the infestation. The truth about what happened at Massachusetts General Hospital needed to reach the public no matter the risk. Dr. Hassan and I traveled with two other resistance members, Eliza, a former NSA cybersecurity specialist, and Marcus, who'd been a pararescue jumper with the Air Force. We moved south through the back roads of Connecticut, avoiding major highways and population centers. The journey was slow but deliberate, staying off the grid completely. Our destination was a meeting point in northern New Jersey where we'd rendezvous with the whistleblower, a scientist from the original research team who had tried to halt the project before containment failed. According to Resistance Intelligence, he had escaped with comprehensive documentation of the program's true purpose and the deliberate negligence that led to the outbreak. The changed world became more evident as we traveled. Small towns we passed through showed three distinct states: abandoned, barricaded, or overrun. The abandoned ones were eerie, possessions left mid-use, vehicles with doors open, evidence of hasty evacuation. Barricaded communities had makeshift walls, armed guards, spotlights scanning perimeters. The overrun towns were recognizable from a distance by the distinctive movement patterns of the infected wandering the streets. We developed protocols for approaching each type. For abandoned areas, Marcus would scout ahead, ensuring no infected remained. For barricaded communities, Eliza would make contact first, her non-threatening appearance more likely to get a response than armed men. We avoided overrun areas entirely, detouring around them regardless of the additional travel time. 7 days into our journey, we encountered something new, a town that appeared normal at first glance. New Haven, Connecticut had functioning streetlights, organized activity, even vehicles moving on streets. But as we observed from a forested hillside, I noticed the patterns were wrong. The movements are too regular, I told Dr. Hassan, pointing out figures walking in precise intervals. Look at the timing, they're keeping exact distances from each other. That's not natural human behavior. Dr. Hassan studied the town through binoculars. The patrols are synchronized. Even their head movements are coordinated. This isn't a survivor community, it's something else entirely. As daylight faded, the truth became clearer. The townspeople moved between buildings with mechanical precision. Some stood in place for hours like sentries. Others traveled specific routes, perfectly timed. Most disturbing were the pairs who moved together, one apparently uninfected human being escorted by an infected guide. The virus is evolving, Marcus whispered. They're not just mindless attackers anymore. They're organizing. Not organizing, Dr. Hassan corrected. Being organized. The neurological patterns are becoming more sophisticated. The virus is creating specialized roles within the infected population: sentries, scouts, handlers for the newly infected. This is what the research was trying to achieve. Eliza's face went pale. You mean this was the goal? To create a virus that turns people into a coordinated organism? Not exactly, Dr. Hassan replied. The research was exploring neurological reprogramming for military applications, creating enhanced soldiers with modified fear responses, pain tolerance, and coordinated behaviors. But they lost control of the parameters. Instead of enhancement, they created replacement. The virus doesn't modify existing neural pathways, it overwrites them completely. We retreated deeper into the forest, processing this disturbing evolution. If the infected were developing specialized functions, traditional containment methods would eventually fail. The virus wasn't just spreading, it was adapting, becoming more efficient at conversion and control. We bypassed New Haven entirely, adding days to our journey but avoiding the risk of encountering this new organized infected behavior. As we moved deeper into Connecticut, we began finding evidence of military operations that had been censored from emergency broadcasts, entire communities razed to the ground, impact craters from ordnance, bodies both infected and uninfected. They're not distinguishing anymore, Marcus noted grimly, examining char patterns on buildings. These are carpet bombing patterns. They're writing off entire areas. Our rendezvous point was a decommissioned communications facility in northwestern New Jersey. As we approached the state border, we encountered increasing military presence, checkpoints, drone surveillance, even helicopter patrols. Passing through undetected required moving exclusively at night and utilizing every stealth technique Marcus could teach us. We reached the rendezvous point 3 days late, expecting our contact might have abandoned the meeting. Instead, we found signs of a confrontation: shell casings, blood trails, evidence of multiple vehicles. Inside the facility, equipment had been destroyed, documents burned. In a hidden compartment beneath a floor panel, the type of hiding place my pest control work had taught me to recognize, we found a sealed waterproof case containing a portable hard drive and a handwritten note. Heading to fallback location. Vanguard compromised. Trust no government contact. The hard drive contained encrypted files that Eliza spent hours decoding. What she uncovered confirmed our worst fears. The virus research had been code-named Project Shepherd, designed explicitly to create neurological control mechanisms for population management in hostile territories. Initial testing had focused on creating compliant behaviors, but the virus had mutated, creating the aggressive spread pattern instead. More disturbing were documents showing that certain government elements had recognized the research potential even after containment failed. Rather than immediately shutting down the project, they had monitored early community spread, documenting infection patterns and behavioral changes. They had sacrificed Boston for data. The whistleblower's notes identified a secure research facility in the Catskill Mountains where backup samples of the original virus were stored, along with early research data. If a treatment or vaccine were possible, the necessary genomic information would be there, not in the sanitized databases available to mainstream research facilities. "This is what we need," Dr. Hassan said after reviewing the files. "The unmodified genetic sequence before the mutations that caused aggression. With this, we might develop a neuroblocker that prevents the virus from overriding brain functions." Our new destination became this mountain facility, a journey that would take us through increasingly dangerous territory. The military had established a containment perimeter along major highways surrounding New York City, which was now designated a total loss zone in military communications. Our path required traversing the Hudson Valley, an area with variable infection rates. Some communities had successfully isolated themselves while others had fallen completely. We planned our route to utilize natural barriers, rivers, steep terrain, dense forests that would impede infected movement. 2 days into this new journey, we encountered another survivor group, civilians who had escaped New York City before full quarantine was established. They were led by a former transit authority engineer who had used his knowledge of maintenance tunnels and emergency evacuation routes to lead 37 people out before the military sealed the exits. Their leader, Raymond Chen, shared critical information about the infection's progression in the city. "It wasn't random," he explained. "The spread followed subway lines first, then concentrated in high-density housing. But the military quarantine came before the infection reached critical mass. Something else happened that triggered the total evacuation order." His group had witnessed military units deploying what appeared to be chemical agents in certain neighborhoods. They weren't fighting the infection, they were testing something. Different compounds in different districts, then documenting the results. They were experimenting on populated areas. This aligned with the whistleblower's information about ongoing research. The nightmare scenario was becoming clearer. Elements within the government were treating the outbreak as an opportunity to gather data on population control methods, sacrificing cities to advance the research. Raymond's group joined our journey toward the Catskill facility, their numbers providing additional security while we provided direction and purpose. Among their group was a virologist named Dr. Maya Patel, who had worked on tangential research at Columbia University. "The approach is theoretically sound," she confirmed after reviewing the whistleblower's data. HZV1 spreads through the bloodstream, but its primary action is neurological. If we can develop a compound that blocks the specific protein receptors it uses to access the central nervous system, we could create a treatment for early-stage infection. Our combined group moved north through increasingly remote areas, avoiding both military and infected contact. The seasonal timing worked in our favor. Late autumn meant reduced civilian outdoor activity, making our movement less noticeable. But the colder temperatures brought new challenges, particularly for the children and elderly in Raymond's group. 10 days into our combined journey, we reached the foothills of the Catskills. The research facility was located near an old hunting lodge that had been converted for government use decades earlier. According to the whistleblower's information, it was designed to appear abandoned, with the actual laboratories located underground. Dr. Hassan, Marcus, Eliza, and I scouted the facility for 3 days before attempting entry. What we found was concerning. The above-ground structures showed signs of recent military presence but no current activity. More disturbing was the evidence of hasty evacuation, equipment loading tracks, helicopter landing zones, burned documents. They've cleaned it out, Marcus concluded. Whatever was here, they've relocated it. But my pest control experience suggested otherwise. The power's still connected, I pointed out, noting the warm air exhaust vents partially hidden in the landscape design. And these are active security measures, not abandoned ones. The motion detection angles are maintained, the camera lenses are clean, someone's still operating down there. We developed an infiltration plan that utilized my knowledge of facility maintenance systems. Most secure buildings, regardless of purpose, have similar infrastructure needs: air handling, water, electrical, waste management. These systems require maintenance access that often bypasses primary security. I identified an overlooked vulnerability, a drainage culvert that had been expanded to accommodate increased water runoff from the underground facility. The culvert led to a maintenance access tunnel that would likely connect to lower levels. Our infiltration team consisted of myself, Dr. Hassan, Eliza for her technical skills, and Dr. Patel for her virology expertise. We entered the drainage system after midnight, using the cover of a rainstorm to mask our approach. The tunnel was barely large enough to crawl through, cold water soaking us as we progressed. After nearly 200 yards, we reached a maintenance junction with access panels. Eliza bypassed the security sensors, allowing us to enter a utility corridor that served the underground facility. The corridor was dimly lit by emergency lighting, suggesting limited operations rather than full abandonment. We moved cautiously through the maintenance level, encountering no personnel but noting recent activity, fresh footprints in dust, equipment in standby mode rather than powered down. Using facility maps from the whistleblower's files, we located the central laboratory level. What we found there explained the reduced staff presence. The facility had been largely automated, with robotic systems maintaining experimental protocols. In the central lab, environmental chambers contained test subjects, rats and primates in various stages of infection, monitored by sophisticated diagnostic equipment. Dr. Patel accessed the research database, confirming our suspicion. They've been continuing the research remotely. These systems are uploading data to an off-site location. They're testing variation after variation of the virus, measuring neurological impact and transmission rates. In a secure storage unit, we found what we'd come for: preserved samples of the original virus strain, along with the complete genomic sequence and developmental history. Dr. Patel carefully packed these materials, while Eliza downloaded the research data. As we prepared to exit, facility systems suddenly activated, lights brightening, doors engaging automatic locks. A computerized voice announced, "Remote access detected, security protocol initiated, containment measures activating in 3 minutes." The facility's automated defense system had been triggered. We had limited time to escape before being trapped underground. Worse, the security protocol appeared to include releasing the experimental subjects as a final containment measure. The animal cages were unlocking systematically. We fled back toward the maintenance tunnel, pursued by infected test animals showing the advanced coordinative behaviors we'd observed in New Haven. Unlike the shambling infected humans, from the hospital, these test subjects moved with disturbing precision, almost tactically. Reaching the drainage culvert, we encountered another problem. The security system had closed flood control gates, and water was rapidly rising in the tunnel. We had moments to decide: risk drowning in the drainage system or face the approaching infected test subjects. I remembered something from the facility diagrams, an emergency pressure release valve designed to prevent exactly this flooding scenario. It would be manually operated, likely in the junction we had passed through earlier. "Keep going toward the exit," I told the others. "I'll open the release valve and follow you out." Dr. Hassan protested, but there was no time to argue. They continued toward the exit with the vital research materials while I doubled back. Locating the release valve required navigating by touch in the rising water. The mechanism was stiff from disuse, requiring all my strength to turn. As the valve finally gave way, releasing the building water pressure, I heard splashing behind me. One of the infected primates had followed me into the flooded tunnel. In the dim emergency lighting, I could see its eyes, not the mindless gaze of the hospital infected, but something calculating, determined. I dove under the water, swimming past the junction where the pressure was now creating a powerful current toward the exit. The infected primate caught my leg as I passed. Even underwater, I could feel its unnatural strength as it tried to bite through my boot. I kicked free and let the current carry me toward the exit, tumbling through the drainage pipe and finally emerging outside where the others waited. Dr. Patel immediately checked me for bites or scratches, finding none except minor abrasions from the tunnel itself. "We need to move now," Marcus urged, helping me to my feet. "That security alert will trigger external responses. Military units will be inbound." We retreated to where Raymond's group waited with vehicles. As we drove away, we could already hear helicopters approaching from the south. By dawn, we had reached a pre-arranged safe house in the mountains, an abandoned hunting lodge retrofitted by the resistance as a fallback position. Dr. Patel immediately began analyzing the samples we'd recovered working with improvised lab equipment. Her preliminary findings confirmed Dr. Hassan's theory. The virus had been engineered specifically to affect neurological control systems, creating a form of external command capability through biochemical overrides of normal brain function. More disturbing was evidence that the virus had been designed with deliberate mutation capacity. It was programmed to evolve in response to environmental resistance, adapting to overcome containment measures or treatment attempts. This explained the progressively shorter incubation periods and the emerging specialized behaviors among the infected. This wasn't an accident, Dr. Patel concluded. The containment failure might have been unintentional, but the virus's design was deliberate. It was created to be uncontainable if it escaped. Dr. Hassan studied the genetic sequences. "There's something else here, a vulnerability built into the viral structure, a self-limiting factor that prevents complete neural replacement. That's why some infected retain rudimentary function while others develop specialized behaviors. The virus can't fully override certain neural architectures." This discovery provided the first real hope. If the virus had an inherent limitation, it could potentially be exploited to develop a treatment. Not a cure for the already transformed, but a preventative measure for the uninfected or recently exposed. As Dr. Patel and Dr. Hassan worked to develop this potential treatment, Eliza made a breakthrough with the downloaded data. "They're tracking the outbreak progression nationally," she reported, showing us infection spread maps. "The East Coast is heavily affected, with concentrated outbreaks in major cities, but the Mountain West and Pacific Northwest are still largely clear. They've established quarantine zones along the Mississippi River." Most revealing was evidence that military strategy had shifted from containment to observation. Resources were being allocated to secure research facilities and data collection rather than civilian evacuation or treatment. The government had essentially written off the eastern seaboard, focusing instead on documenting the virus's spread and evolution. "They're treating this as a field test," Marcus said bitterly, reviewing the tactical deployment information. "Measuring infection, rates, behavioral adaptations, population response. They lost control of the weapon but kept the experiment going." Dr. Patel looked up from her microscope, "And I think I know why. The virus is showing evidence of stabilization in later generations. The mutations are becoming more predictable, more manageable. They're waiting for it to evolve into something they can control." The implications were staggering. The government wasn't fighting the outbreak. They were shepherding it, allowing it to burn through the population until it reached a form they could harness. The original weapons research was continuing, with the entire eastern United States as its involuntary test subject. In that moment, our mission expanded beyond survival or treatment development. We needed to expose this deliberate negligence, to document what had really happened at Massachusetts General Hospital and in the aftermath. The truth about Project Shepherd needed to reach whatever remained of the uninfected world. Our plan developed along two parallel tracks. Dr. Patel and Dr. Hassan would continue work on the preventative treatment using the original virus samples, while the rest of us would focus on documenting and transmitting the truth about Project Shepherd. With military forces likely searching for us after the facility breach, we needed to relocate frequently, never staying in one place more than 48 hours. Raymond's knowledge of transportation infrastructure proved invaluable as we moved west toward the Mississippi quarantine zone. He identified rail lines, still partially operational, and maintenance vehicles that could travel them without triggering automated monitoring systems. Using these, we traveled through Pennsylvania toward the Ohio border, avoiding major population centers and military checkpoints. During this journey, we gathered more evidence of the government's true response. In small towns throughout western Pennsylvania, we found testing stations abandoned but not destroyed, places where military medical units had been taking blood samples from survivors before evacuating them to designated zones. The pattern suggested they were screening for natural resistance factors, identifying individuals with partial immunity for research purposes. More disturbing were the segregated quarantine areas, facilities where exposed but asymptomatic individuals were housed in observation units. Local residents told us these people were never evacuated when military units withdrew. They were simply left behind, locked in these facilities without supplies or support. The implication was chilling. These weren't treatment centers, but human test sites, left to document how long natural resistance could delay infection. Dr. Patel's work with the virus samples confirmed our suspicions. The original strain was engineered with specific protein markers that allow tracking of mutations, she explained during one evening briefing. Every evolved version maintains these markers, like a signature. They can identify exactly which generation of the virus has infected an individual, measuring how it changes as it passes through the population. Our documentation efforts expanded beyond Project Shepherd to include these ongoing experimental protocols. Marcus and I focused on gathering physical evidence, photographing facilities, collecting sample test kits, recording testimony from survivors who had witnessed military testing operations. Eliza worked on compiling digital evidence from local government and hospital systems that were now abandoned but still powered. 3 weeks into our westward journey, we reached the Mississippi quarantine zone, a heavily militarized boundary establishing what government communications called the containment perimeter. The eastern bank had been largely evacuated, with bridge crossings demolished and naval vessels patrolling the water. Military installations dotted the western bank, with advanced scanning systems monitoring for attempted crossings. Our initial reconnaissance revealed the perimeter wasn't designed just to keep infected out of the western states. It was equally focused on preventing information from crossing. Communication jammers blocked unauthorized transmissions, and civilian movement was restricted even for the uninfected. Medical screening was mandatory for anyone approved to cross, with extensive documentation requirements that few refugees could satisfy. "They're containing the truth as much as the virus," Raymond observed as we watched the military processing center through binoculars. "Look at the screening protocols. They're separating people based on profession and knowledge, based not just health status." He was right. Individuals with medical, scientific, or government backgrounds were directed to special processing areas, while general civilians received more cursory screening. This suggested filtering based on who might understand or expose what had really happened. Our chances of crossing legitimately were non-existent. Our faces were likely flagged in military databases after the Catskills facility breach. Instead, we identified a potential crossing point 50 miles south of St. Louis, where the river narrowed and agricultural areas reached close to both banks. Automated surveillance would be harder to maintain in these areas compared to urban crossing points. Dr. Hassan and Dr. Patel had made significant progress with their treatment development, creating a compound that could theoretically block the virus from binding to neural receptors if administered before or shortly after exposure. They had limited materials to produce it, enough for perhaps 20 doses, but the formula was the crucial element. If we could get it to uncompromised medical facilities west of the Mississippi, it could be reproduced. The night before our planned crossing attempt, we received an unexpected radio transmission on the resistance frequency, a message specifically requesting contact with Rat Catcher from Mass General. The sender identified as Monica, the nurse I had escaped with weeks earlier. Using carefully established authentication protocols, we verified her identity and arranged a brief transmission window. She was with a survivor community in western Illinois, just 30 miles from our position. They had established a secure compound with operational medical facilities and were developing their own response to the outbreak. "We've been monitoring military communications," Monica explained during our brief exchange. "There's a major operation planned for 3 days from now. They're calling it Firebreak Protocol. They're going to use incendiary weapons along the entire eastern seaboard, from Maine to Florida. This wasn't containment. It was erasure, destroying all evidence of the original outbreak and research programs. Any witnesses or infected still in those areas would be eliminated, along with all physical evidence of what had actually happened. We have a way across the river," Monica continued. "A maintenance tunnel for the hydroelectric facility 30 miles north of your position. It's not on military maps because it was decommissioned officially, but it's still structurally sound. We use it for reconnaissance missions. This changed our plans completely. Instead of risking a water crossing, we redirected north toward the hydroelectric facility. Monica's group would meet us on the eastern side and guide us through. The timing was critical. The tunnel access point was briefly unmonitored during shift changes in the military patrol schedule. We reached the rendezvous point as planned, where Monica waited with 3 members of her group. Our reunion was brief but emotional. Seeing a familiar face from those first chaotic days at the hospital felt like reconnecting with a different lifetime. "The tunnel access is through the maintenance building," she explained, leading us to an innocuous structure that looked like an abandoned equipment shed. "The military patrols this area, but they focus on the main dam structure, not these auxiliary buildings." Inside, concealed beneath equipment storage, was a hatch leading to a narrow service tunnel. Originally designed for maintenance crews to access underwater sections of the dam, it had been officially sealed when the hydroelectric function was decommissioned. Monica's group had discovered it still provided a traversable path beneath the river. The tunnel was barely 5 feet high, requiring us to crouch as we moved through it. Water leaked through seams in the concrete, and the air was damp and stale. Our progress was slow, each step carefully placed to avoid echoes that might be detected by patrols above. Halfway through, disaster nearly struck. Military sonar pinged through the river above us. They were conducting an underwater sweep, possibly having detected unusual movement or heat signatures. We froze in place, lights extinguished, barely breathing as the pings passed directly overhead. "They're increasing security protocols," Monica whispered once the sonar moved away. "Some things accelerated their timeline." We continued with even greater caution, finally emerging in a similar maintenance structure on the western bank. Monica's people had vehicles waiting, camouflaged in the tree line beyond the perimeter fence. We transferred our precious cargo, the treatment formula, the virus samples, and most critically, the complete documentation of Project Shepherd and the government's response. The compound where Monica's group had established themselves was a former agricultural research station, isolated but well-equipped with laboratories and sustainable infrastructure. They had gathered nearly 60 survivors, including several medical researchers working independently on understanding the virus. Dr. Patel and Dr. Hassan immediately connected with these researchers, sharing their treatment formula and the original virus samples. Together, they began producing additional doses of the preventative compound while refining the formula for more efficient production with limited resources. Meanwhile, Eliza worked with the group's communications specialists to prepare our documentation for transmission. They had maintained a heavily encrypted satellite uplink, capable of transmitting data to international research centers beyond U.S. government control. The complete Project Shepherd files, along with our evidence of continued experimentation, would reach multiple global health organizations simultaneously, making suppression impossible. The night before the scheduled transmission, military movement increased dramatically around the perimeter. Drone flights over the compound became more frequent, and long-range surveillance equipment was detected scanning the facility. They knew we were here, or at least suspected. They're preparing a strike team, Marcus assessed based on the pattern of reconnaissance. We have hours at most. The transmission had to happen immediately. Eliza initiated the upload sequence, while the rest of us prepared for possible evacuation or defense. The data package was massive. Detailed genetic sequences, research notes, facility documentation, witness testimony, photographic evidence, requiring nearly 30 minutes of continuous transmission to complete. 20 minutes into the transmission, the first warning came: perimeter sensors detecting movement in the surrounding forest. Marcus coordinated defensive positions, while Raymond organized the evacuation plan for non-combatants, particularly the researchers and their critical work. Transmission at 80%, Eliza reported as we heard the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors approaching. We need 7 more minutes. Those 7 minutes stretched into eternity. Military units breached the outer perimeter fence, deploying what appeared to be specialized containment teams rather than standard combat units. They moved methodically, using non-lethal suppression tactics designed to capture rather than kill. Dr. Hassan made a difficult decision. We need to split the research team. Half evacuate with the treatment formula, half remain to complete the transmission. If either objective fails, the other must succeed. I chose to remain with the transmission team. My knowledge of Massachusetts General, my direct witness testimony of Patient Zero, made me valuable for authenticating the documentation. Dr. Patel would lead the research evacuation, carrying both the treatment formula and samples of the original virus to continue their work elsewhere. As the transmission reached 95%, the military units reached the main building. They deployed gas canisters through windows and ventilation systems, not lethal agents, but powerful sedatives designed for mass incapacitation. We need to buy more time, Marcus said, preparing a last defensive position around the communications center. Once that transmission completes, make sure you destroy the equipment. They can't know who received it. The final moments were chaos. The gas filled the lower levels as the transmission counter ticked toward completion. Eliza worked frantically, routing the transmission through multiple satellite relays to obscure its destination. At 99%, the door to the communications center breached. Military personnel in full containment gear poured in, weapons trained on us. Their commander stepped forward. Secure the transmission equipment. No one touches anything. Eliza looked up from her workstation with a smile. Too late, it's done. The commander's reaction confirmed everything. Pure panic as he ordered his technical specialist to trace the transmission. But Eliza had routed it through too many relays, bouncing the signal across multiple commercial and government satellites. The truth about Project Shepherd was now beyond their control. What happened next occurred with clinical efficiency. We were sedated, processed through field medical stations, then transported to a secure facility in Colorado. Not a prison or detention center as we'd feared, but a specialized research installation where government scientists were desperately working to manage the outbreak they had created. I spent 3 weeks in isolation, regularly interviewed about what I'd witnessed at Massachusetts General Hospital and what we'd discovered afterward. The questioning was nonviolent but thorough, focused particularly on the treatment formula Dr. Patel and Dr. Hassan had developed. The government was shifting its strategy again. With the truth about Project Shepherd now exposed internationally, containment of information was no longer possible. Instead, they pivoted to controlling the narrative, acknowledging partial responsibility, while positioning themselves as the solution to the crisis they had created. I learned that the firebreak protocol had been executed as planned, effectively destroying much of the eastern seaboard under the justification of preventing further spread. Military estimates placed the casualties in the millions, both infected and uninfected sacrificed to erase evidence and witnesses. What they didn't know was that Dr. Patel's team had successfully evacuated before the compound was breached. According to facility chatter, they remained unlocated, presumably continuing their work on the treatment formula beyond government control. The samples of the original virus they carried represented a critical backup should anything happen to the government's increasingly unstable supply. More significant was the international response to our transmitted evidence. Foreign governments had initiated their own containment measures, refusing entry to American military or government personnel without extensive screening. Global health organizations had established independent research initiatives, using our data to develop their own treatment approaches without U.S. government interference. After weeks of isolation, my status changed abruptly. I was transferred to a different section of the facility, given limited freedom of movement, and recruited to assist their research efforts. My specialized knowledge of Massachusetts General's infrastructure had unexpected value. They were using the hospital's original architectural plans to model how the virus had spread through similar facilities. While working within their research division, I gained access to current infection mapping. The spread had been contained at the Mississippi for now, but behavioral changes in the infected continued to evolve. The specialized functions I'd observed in New Haven had become standard. The infected now routinely displayed coordinated behaviors, with apparent specialization among individuals. Most concerning were reports of communication between infected groups, not verbal language, but a system of gestures and vocalizations that allowed coordinated action across distances. The virus wasn't just controlling individuals, it was creating a networked organism from the infected population. This suggested neural linking mechanisms far beyond what Project Shepherd had originally designed. In my limited communications with other consultants, former resistance members also recruited after capture, I learned that similar evolution was occurring nationwide in infected zones. The virus was adapting differently based on local conditions, creating specialized variants optimized for different environments. During a research briefing, I finally understood the government's current strategy. They weren't trying to cure or eliminate the virus anymore. They were trying to develop their own version that they could control. The original weapon development program had never been abandoned, just redirected. This knowledge made my continued cooperation impossible. Using the access I'd gained through my research assistants, I began gathering new documentation of their current programs. The pest control specialist in me recognized that they were treating symptoms while ignoring the source, designing countermeasures against current viral behaviors rather than addressing the fundamental mechanisms that allowed it to evolve. 2 months after my capture, I made contact with an international medical team that had been permitted limited access to the facility as part of diplomatic negotiations. Through careful coded communications, I passed them updated research data and evidence of the government's continued weapons program. 3 days later, I was extracted during what appeared to be a security breach but was actually a coordinated operation between international health authorities and elements within the U.S. military who opposed the continuing research. The extraction team included a familiar face, Monica, who had successfully integrated with legitimate medical response teams after escaping our compound. That was 4 months ago. Since then, I've been working with an international coalition documenting the truth about the outbreak and developing genuine treatment options. Dr. Patel's formula has been refined and mass-produced, providing effective prevention for the uninfected and early-stage treatment for recent exposures. The infected still control much of the eastern United States, their behaviors continuing to evolve in ways that suggest increasingly sophisticated neural networking. Military containment holds at the Mississippi, but breaches occur with growing frequency as the infected develop new strategies. I record this testimony from a secure facility in the Rocky Mountains, where survivors from Massachusetts General and other outbreak zones provide first-hand accounts to create a comprehensive record. The truth about Patient Zero, about Project Shepherd, about the government's failed containment and deliberate experimentation, must not be lost or rewritten. My name is Emmett Ratcatcher Royce. I survived the first 72 hours of the outbreak at Boston General Hospital because I understood the patterns, not just of the infected, but of the institutional failures that created them. The rats saw it coming before anyone else. They fled the hospital while humans kept working, kept experimenting, kept ignoring warning signs. In pest control, we have a saying: you never fully eliminate an infestation. You just manage it to acceptable levels. This is where we are now with HCV1, managing, containing, developing countermeasures against an evolving threat. But unlike conventional pests, this one was of our own making, released through arrogance and sustained through deception. The infected continue to evolve. Recent observations suggest they're developing specialized variants based on their hosts' original knowledge and skills. Military infected coordinate differently than civilian infected. Medical infected demonstrate rudimentary treatment behaviors toward newly infected individuals. The virus isn't just rewriting neural pathways, it's selectively preserving and networking certain types of knowledge. If you're watching this in a safe zone, remember this. The virus spreads through bites and fluid contact, but the true infection, the arrogance that created it, the institutional failure that released it, the deception that allowed it to spread, that infection spreads through silence and obedience. The only vaccine against that is truth. I don't know if human civilization as we knew it will survive this, but I know this record must survive. The truth about what happened at Massachusetts General Hospital in those first 72 hours, and everything that followed. Watch for the patterns, listen to the warnings, and remember that sometimes the real monsters aren't the infected,